Imagine being strapped into a metal tube, hurtling through the sky at twice the speed of sound. You are sitting on thousands of gallons of explosive fuel, and your only goal is to hunt down an enemy that is actively trying to hunt you back. This is the daily reality for the pilots of the Ukrainian Air Force. But there is one story that stands out from the chaos of the air war. A story that sounds more like a Hollywood script than a mission report. It involves a lone Ukrainian Su-27 flanker, a tempting Russian transport plane, and a trap that was so well laid it almost ended in disaster. This wasn't just a simple dogfight. It was a complex game of 3D chess played at 30,000 feet. The pilot thought he had found the perfect target, a slow, defenseless Russian AN-26 transport plane. It looked like an easy win, a fat target. But in war, when something looks too good to be true, it's usually because you're about to walk into a nightmare. What happened next wasn't just a kill. It was a catastrophic chain reaction that nearly took the attacker down with the target. Today, we are breaking down the moment a Ukrainian jet scored a massive hit, only to realize, too late, that the explosion was the least of his problems. To understand why this specific engagement was so dangerous, you have to understand the arena these pilots are fighting in. The skies over the southern front of Ukraine are what experts call a gray zone. It's not fully controlled by Ukraine and it's not fully controlled by Russia. It is a no man's land where surface-to-air missile batteries on the ground are constantly scanning for movement and enemy fighters are always patrolling just beyond the horizon. For a Ukrainian Su-27 pilot, flying in this zone is like walking a tightrope over a shark tank. The Su-27 is a heavy fighter, a beast of the Cold War era. It's powerful, fast, and incredibly maneuverable, but it lacks the modern stealth technology of the newest jets. When you turn on your radar in a Su-27, you are essentially lighting a flare in a dark room. Everyone knows where you are. Because of this, pilots often fly low, dangerously low, skimming treetops to hide in the ground clutter of enemy radar. They fly silent, relying on ground control to guide them toward targets. On this particular morning, the mission profile was standard: patrol the edge of the gray zone and intercept any intruders. The weather was grim, with thick cloud layers providing the only cover. It was the kind of day where you can't see the enemy until you're right on top of them. The pilot was tense, his eyes scanning the instruments, waiting for the call. And then it came. Not a flight of enemy fighters, but a single lonely blip on the radar screen. A slow mover. The target was identified as an Antonov AN-26. In the high-speed world of supersonic fighters, the AN-26 is a dinosaur. It's a twin-engine turboprop transport plane designed decades ago to haul cargo, paratroopers, and supplies. It's slow, it's loud, and it flies like a brick compared to a fighter jet. But don't let its appearance fool you. Shooting one of these down is a massive strategic victory. These planes are the logistical backbone of the Russian military effort. They aren't just carrying mail, they are often transporting high-value assets. We're talking about senior commanders, electronic warfare specialists, or critical spare parts for radar systems. Sometimes they are loaded to the brim with ammunition that is urgently needed on the front lines. Taking out an AN-26 is like cutting an artery. It disrupts the flow of supplies and causes panic in the command chain. But there was something strange about this specific AN-26. Usually, these high-value assets are kept well behind the safety of the Russian lines, protected by layers of air defense systems like the S-300 or S-400. If they do venture near the front, they are almost always escorted by fighters. But this one was alone. It was drifting near the contested airspace, seemingly oblivious to the danger. For the Ukrainian pilot, this raised a massive red flag. Why was such a juicy target left unguarded? Was the crew lost, or was something else going on? The pilot of the Su-27 had a split-second decision to make. In the cockpit, time moves differently. You don't have minutes to weigh the pros and cons, you have heartbeats. If he engaged the AN-26, he would have to climb out of the safety of the low altitude exposing his jet to every long-range radar in the sector. He would have to turn on his own targeting radar, which would instantly alert every Russian unit within 100 miles of his position. It's the classic hunter's dilemma. Do you take the shot and risk becoming the target? Or do you let the prize go and stay safe? The pilot checked his fuel. He had enough for a quick intercept and a high-speed dash back to base. He checked his weapons. His pylons were loaded with R-73 heat-seeking missiles and R-27 radar-guided missiles. He was ready for a fight. The temptation was too great. A target like this could carry a general or tons of specialized equipment. Destroying it could save hundreds of lives on the ground. The pilot pushed the throttle forward. The twin engines of the flanker roared to life, kicking out thousands of pounds of thrust. The jet pitched up, climbing rapidly through the gray clouds. He was committing to the attack. He was leaving the shadows and stepping into the spotlight. As the SU-27 closed the distance, the pilot kept his eyes glued to the radar warning receiver, the RWR. This is a crucial piece of kit that tells a pilot if they are being painted by enemy radar. So far, it was silent. The sky seemed empty. It was eerie. The AN-26 was just there, drifting. The pilot decided to get visual confirmation. He didn't want to fire a radar-guided missile from long range and risk missing or hitting the wrong target. He wanted to be sure. He pushed the flanker to Mach 1, breaking the sound barrier as he closed in on the transport. The distance dropped rapidly. 20 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers. Finally, the shape of the transport plane emerged from the haze. It was definitely military. The high wings, the twin props, the distinct silhouette of the Antonov. It was flying straight and level, completely unaware that a predator was sitting on its tail. The Ukrainian pilot positioned himself behind and slightly below the transport in its blind spot. He was now in the kill zone. At this range, he didn't even need his radar. He could use the infrared search and track (IRST) system, a passive sensor that looks for the heat of the enemy engines. This meant he could lock onto the target without emitting a single electronic signal. He was a ghost. He selected a short-range R-73 missile. The seeker head growled in his headset, a tone indicating it sensed the hot exhaust of the transport's turboprops. Let's pause the action for a second to explain what was likely happening here. Why would a valuable Russian transport be flying alone near the front lines? The answer lies in a brutal tactic known as the SAM trap, or air ambush. Russian air tactics have evolved. They know the Ukrainian pilots are aggressive. They know they will take risks to intercept high-value targets. So they use bait. They send a drone or an older aircraft or sometimes even a manned transport plane into a vulnerable position. They instruct the pilot to fly a specific path that makes them visible to Ukrainian radar. Meanwhile, flying high above at 40,000 feet or loitering far back with powerful long-range radars are the hunters, usually Su-35s or MiG-31s armed with long-range R-37M missiles. They are waiting. They are watching. As soon as a Ukrainian jet climbs up to attack the bait, the hunters pounce. It is a cynical, cold-blooded strategy. The crew of the bait aircraft are essentially pawns, dangled in front of the enemy to draw out the fighters. The Ukrainian pilot didn't know for sure if this was a trap, but his gut was telling him to be fast. Get in, hit the target, and get out before the trap snaps shut. Back in the cockpit, the tone was steady. The lock was good. The pilot uncovered the launch button on the flight stick. Fox 2, he whispered to himself, the code for a heat-seeking missile launch. He squeezed the trigger. The aircraft shuddered as the missile detached from the rail. The rocket motor ignited with a blinding flash, sending a trail of white smoke streaking toward the AN-26. At this range, there is no escape. The transport plane is too big and too slow to dodge a missile that can pull 40 Gs of turning force. The pilot watched as the missile closed the gap in seconds. He was already preparing to bank hard and dive away. He expected a standard impact, an explosion, a fire, the plane spiraling down. He had seen it before. But he wasn't prepared for what was actually inside that transport plane. The missile impacted the right engine of the AN-26. Under normal circumstances, this would blow the wing off or destroy the engine. But this AN-26 was carrying something volatile. Maybe it was crates of artillery shells, maybe it was anti-tank mines, or maybe it was aviation fuel for the frontline helicopters. Whatever it was, it didn't just burn. It detonated. The explosion was catastrophic. It wasn't just a fireball, it was a shockwave. The entire transport plane seemed to disintegrate in a millisecond. A massive sphere of orange fire and black smoke expanded outward at supersonic speeds. It looked less like an air crash and more like a tactical nuke going off in the sky. The Ukrainian pilot, who was following closely to confirm the kill, was suddenly staring into the sun. The sky lit up. And then came the debris. This is a danger that isn't talked about enough in movies. Target fixation. When a pilot is focused on destroying a target, they naturally fly towards it. If that target explodes violently, the attacker flies right into the expanding cloud of shrapnel. The SU-27 hit the wall of debris. Imagine driving a car at 500 miles per hour into a cloud of metal scraps, burning rubber and aluminum chunks. The sound was deafening. Thud, 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 crack. Pieces of the destroyed. AN-26 slammed into the flanker's fuselage. The canopy cracked. The sensors were blinded by the soot and smoke. But the worst part? The engines. Jet engines are delicate precision machines. They suck in huge amounts of air. If they suck in a piece of metal, the turbine blades shatter, turning the engine into a grenade. The pilot felt a violent lurch as his jet absorbed the impact. Alarms started screaming in the cockpit. Engine vibration. Hydraulic pressure low. He had destroyed the target, but the target had effectively punched him back from the grave. He was now flying a damaged jet, losing speed and disoriented by the blast. As if things couldn't get worse, the trap was sprung. The moment the explosion lit up the sky, the Russian radars waiting in the distance got what they wanted. They saw the heat signature. They saw the radar reflection of the Ukrainian jet as it recoiled from the blast. The pilot's RWR, which had been silent, suddenly erupted into a cacophony of noise. He was being painted, not by a search radar, but by a lock-on radar. The lock tone is distinctive, a continuous high-pitched warble that tells you a missile is either in the air or about to be. High above, 2 Russian Su-35s had turned toward him. They were diving, building up speed, ready to finish off the wounded bird. The Ukrainian pilot was in a nightmare scenario. Low on energy, damaged airframe, sensors blinking red, and the most advanced fighters in the Russian arsenal diving on his 6 o'clock. This is where training takes over. Panic is a death sentence. The pilot didn't think. He reacted. He slammed the throttle to the stops, engaging the afterburners on his damaged engines. He prayed they would hold together. He needed speed, and he needed it now. He pushed the stick forward, diving toward the hard deck. The only way to break the radar lock of the Su-35s was to get low, extremely low. He needed to put the earth between him and the enemy radars. The flanker screamed downward, the G-forces crushing the pilot into his seat. The cracked canopy held, but the wind noise was increasing. As he leveled off, he was skimming the treetops. At this altitude, the world is a blur of green and brown. One mistake, one twitch of the hand, and you impact the ground. But he had no choice. The terrain masking confused the enemy missiles. The Su-35s, unwilling to follow him into the weeds where Ukrainian man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, might be waiting, broke off the pursuit. The flight back to base was the longest 20 minutes of the pilot's life. He had to nurse the jet home. The vibrations were getting worse. He had to constantly adjust the trim to keep the plane flying straight. He checked his fuel gauges. He had burned a massive amount of kerosene during the escape. It was going to be close. He stayed low, following riverbeds and valleys, avoiding known anti-air positions. Every shadow looked like a threat. But finally the runway appeared in the distance. He dropped the landing gear. 3 green lights. The gear was down and locked. He touched down, the tires screeching on the concrete, and popped the drag chute. As the jet rolled to a stop, the ground crew rushed out. When they saw the condition of the plane, they were stunned. The paint was scorched off the nose. There were gouges in the leading edges of the wings. Small pieces of the AN-26 were actually embedded in the metal skin of the SU-27. It was a miracle the engines hadn't ingested a fatal amount of debris. So what did we learn from this chaotic engagement? First, it highlighted the sheer volatility of the cargo these transport planes carry. The explosion that nearly downed the attacker confirms that the AN-26 was packed with high explosives, likely on its way to resupply a major offensive. By taking it out, that pilot, despite the damage, likely saved countless lives on the ground. Second, it exposed the dangerous game of baiting that has become common in this war. The Russians are willing to sacrifice older assets to trap Ukrainian fighters. It's a ruthless calculation. Trade a transport plane for a fighter jet. In this case, the trade failed. They lost the transport, and the Ukrainian jet lived to fight another day. Finally, it showed the incredible resilience of the Su-27 flanker. Critics call it old and they call it loud, but it is built like a tank. A more fragile, modern jet might not have survived flying through a debris field like that. The flanker took a beating and brought its pilot home. It's worth thinking about the mindset of these pilots. Every time they take off, they are outnumbered. They are flying against an enemy with more money, more planes, and newer technology. Yet they continue to go up, T.